And good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's adult education session. We have with us someone who doesn't need my introduction. I'm sure many of you know him already. Longtime CUCC member and very active participant in the local community, who is here to talk with us about the UN sustainability goals. Mel has been involved with the UN Association for a long time, and so this is something that is both very important and something about which he is very knowledgeable. And so we're very grateful that he can help us understand more about these goals, how they impact us and our world. And so, Mel, thank you so much for being willing to share today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacob. Um, the last several weeks of sermons, your sermon last week and Jen's sermon a couple of weeks ago, I think the Good Samaritan was kind of the frame of Jen's sermon. Um, these these remind me, all the major world religions have some form of the golden rule, sort of do unto others as you want them to do to you. Um, or don't do unto others what you wouldn't want them to do to you. Um, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. The golden rule as applied by an organization we are probably familiar with, but we'll quickly review what the United Nations is about. And then we're going to talk about their major targeting to reduce poverty and increase the quality of life worldwide by something called the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, or also known as the Global Goals. A little easier to remember global goals than those bigger words. So I've asked people to put in the chat, and I want you to keep doing this. What are some of the things you would like to see in a good community, a good place to live? Sort of what would make of planet Earth a better place to live. Um, I come at this with my own unique story, of course. Um, I was a Marine, served active duty back in the 60s. I went to college and got some degrees in economics. And courtesy of some of my best friends in college, I became a liberal Democrat. I was very fortunate to travel the world with my second wife, now of 42 years, Beth. Um, and we were very fortunate to be able to travel around the world for 18 months when shortly after we got married. And so I've had a sort of unique blending of my education, my politics, and my faith journey, seeking justice. And the United Nations involves all of that. Bunches of countries um, trying to work out problems, debating instead of fighting. And we hope that what you're going to have in the next hour or less, we're trying to get some people out in time to go to the sanctuary for church, uh, will be of interest to you. I'm going to start with a PowerPoint. Won't surprise you too much. And then I'm going to have a short video and then finish our presentation and then hopefully have time for questions. So let me see if this will work as I hope it will. And give me a thumbs up if you can see it. All right, great. So we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the global goals. You can see there are 17 of them. Can you see my cursor as I'm going around the circle? Great. It's color coordinated. I'm wearing a little piece of jewelry on my shirt here. It's one of the nice pieces of jewelry that reminds us of the global goals. It's got that circle with all the colors of the goals. And I just happen to have some of those. So if you say the right words, I might give you one. And there are 17 goals. That's a lot of goals, of course. but there's a lot of things. You're mentioning some of those in the chat. Um, Sustainability, you said. Um, Treated equally, you said. Kindness to all life, you said. Environmental protections, you said. Economic equity, you said. Um, Deliberate protections for the use um, for those in need. No one goes hungry, you said. Working together to solve problems in the community. You're absolutely right. And these goals were constructed with a lot of input from people like you, based on what would make a better world. And they followed on a tradition of seeking to reduce poverty that started in probably the mid 60s and gained a head of steam in the 90s. And um, it came out of the United Nations. So, just a quick review here. Some of you know these people down at the bottom of the screen. The one on the left is our ambassador to the United Nations, career diplomat, 35 years in the diplomatic corps. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, very skilled and a very experienced diplomat, and I think we're well represented. And the person on the right is the Secretary General of the United Nations. He's from Portugal. His name is Antonio Guterres. And of course, the big picture up in the top there with the seal on the gold field in the background is the General Assembly Hall. This picture, I think, is kind of funny because it's got people cleaning the hall. These are custodians cleaning the hall. Anyway, I enjoyed that picture. There are 6 parts of the United Nations, but the 4th part is really defunct. It doesn't meet anymore. The General Assembly, I gotta not touch my mouse because I'm jumping between slides. The General Assembly, there are 193 member nations and 2 observer nations, including the Holy See. So the Holy See has a observer seat, and so does the Palestinian state is an observer. The other 193 are countries like the United States. The Security Council, which is 15 members, 5 permanent members, the winners of World War II, and 10 others elected by the General Assembly. Third, the Economic and Social Council, many of the agencies you would know about, UNICEF, WHO, many others. There are 60 UN agencies. Most of them report through the Economic and Social Council. The 5th part is the International Court of Justice in The Hague. That's the only part that's not in New York City. And that's where one nation sues another. This is not the war crime trial place. This is the World Court. So if you've committed war crimes, you don't go to the International Court of Justice. You go to the International Criminal Court. The Court of Justice is where, say, the United States would sue China or Japan would sue Germany, and it's in The Hague, often settling things like trade disagreements and other state-to-state legal disputes. And then the 6th part is the Secretariat. Antonio Guterres is our Secretary General, and he has, oh gosh, I think 30,000 people working in the Secretariat, and many of the other agencies of the UN report directly to Antonio. He was the former High Commissioner on Refugees, so he knows a lot about refugees. And he's up for re-election this year. There may be others running for the seat, and we'll see who becomes Secretary General next year. The purposes of the UN. There are 4 purposes. These were written at the time the World War II ended. I always know the age of the United Nations. It's the same age I am. I was born in 45 and so was it. Um, of course, it is to prevent another war like World War II. And it's been pretty successful at preventing a world war. We've had other wars, but not anything as horrible as World War II. Two, the friendly relations among nations, and they do some of that. Cooperation on problems, they do some of that. Center for Harmonizing Actions. So these have stood the test of time. Um, it's kind of the world's parliament. That's the way I think of it. They don't have much independent authority. Only what the member states agree to gets done. Peacekeeping operations have to go through the Security Council, and so any of the permanent five, the victors of World War II, the United States, England, France, Russia, and China, any of them can cast a veto. You've probably heard about the vetoes in the United Nations. Those occur usually in the Security Council. So, but mostly it's a place where people debate important issues. And today we're going to talk about something that came out of the General Assembly and was adopted by all member nations, all 195 of them, the, um, the global goals. They followed on the earlier goals. Some of you may remember these goals. They were the Millennium Goals, so the year 2000. And there were 8 of those goals. And you'll see that some of them are the same. So poverty and hunger is up in the top there. Education, gender equality, maternal health, that's women surviving childbirth and shortly after. Child mortality, which is a serious problem, and we've made progress on that. Environmental sustainability was one of the goals in the Millennium Goals. We were frustrated on that. We didn't make progress. AIDS was a big thing at the centennial, I'm sorry, the millennium. So combating HIV, AIDS, and other diseases. And then partnerships for development. These kind of worked. We had some progress. But the most important thing that kind of got laid down during the Millennium Goal times was the need for better measurement. If you don't measure your progress toward goals, you don't know if you're going to get there. And so they started measuring better, just like a good carpenter. And now we know when we're making progress or when we don't make progress. And after the 2015 time arrived, these were a 15-year set of goals. We had a post 2015 set of goals, which was a much broader discussion, millions of people involved in the discussion, and a target not just on poor and less developed countries, but all of the world. Goals that could apply to every single country on Earth. And that harkens back to what you said in the chat. There are things that we all can do to have a better world. The environment jumps out at us, of course. We're in a pandemic. We need to work together. And every country on Earth is being affected. And here they are, the 17 global goals, sustainable goals. And some of these look familiar, don't they? Millennium Goals, poverty, hunger, health, education, gender equality, some environmental things here, water and sanitation, energy, economic growth, sustainable, industry infrastructure. Everyone needs a quality job, reduced inequality. We are becoming more aware that extreme inequalities, such as we have in the United States today, wreaks havoc with all kinds of things. And from public policy to health to the environment, Inequality drives a lot of things. So measuring it and trying to reduce inequalities is very helpful. Sustainable, many of us live in urban areas now. So cities, responsible consumption and production, maybe less plastic around our packaging, and supply chains that don't have a big carbon footprint, and those kinds of things, not wasting stuff. And then a whole bunch of climate action things. This is sort of the Greta Thunberg section. Fishing, life underwater, life on land. And then the rule of law. Some of you talked about that, people being treated fairly. Black Lives Matter. These are problems worldwide, not just in the United States. And then, of course, working together to achieve the goals. These are very interconnected. You can't have quality education if the kids are hungry or if they're sick. You can't have equality in economics if you don't have gender equality. If women or girls are treated as second-class citizens or don't get education, so that the ties between the goals are really dramatic. And recently, of course, we've been struck by how COVID has impacted the attempts to achieve these goals. So here are some of the sort of crossings of the types of goals. And the overall theme here is leave no one behind. You've got social goals, economic goals, environmental goals. There's other ways to frame the goals as well. You could say legal. You could say philosophical, sort of quality of life. But they're very intricately interconnected. This is just one example. Lots of people have taken this exercise. They centered on goal 12 here, which is sustainable infrastructure and not wasting. And you can see how every one of the goals has some relationship to this. Reducing hunger or keeping the land clear is part of this effort. So is clean water. So is health. So is quality education. They're tied together like a web. You can't achieve them in isolation. I'm reminded that we're getting vaccinated right now. And the fact is, the United States is getting vaccinated very fast. But we know from all the variants of the COVID that if the rest of the world doesn't get vaccinated, all the variants keep spreading and we're still in danger. We can't vaccinate our way out of this thing unless we vaccinate the whole world. So some concepts, we've talked about some of these already, but women and girls are an important part of almost every one of the goals. There's a measurement of impact on women and girls. We talked about inequality and of course, poverty. These are, if we don't address these for everyone, then bad things happen. I think of terrorism comes out of these things. The impact for developed and less developed countries is very important because we're all interconnected. There are so many more people now than there were 76 years ago. Our dependence on each other is even greater. Health and education, which with poverty are deeply interconnected. The climate disaster, we're already feeling the climate change. We can all tell stories of the wildfires and the forest fires and the droughts that we've been through. We need a sustainable form of making a living. We've got to quit playing with that mouse. Human rights, of course. Rule of law, and then I've put in red the impact of COVID-19. And this is all around the world. I'm going to quickly stop the share and go to a YouTube, which this, I think, requires me to go to a separate screen. Yep, we will go to the screen to YouTube. There it is. Oh. I'm having to scramble a little bit here, pardon me. And now we go back to share. There we go. Well, have to have video sound on for this to work. Sorry. Full screen. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
Or SDGs, are a series of goals that aim to end poverty, protect the planet, and improve the lives and prospects of everyone by 2030. But COVID-19 and its effects are a significant setback in progress towards these SDGs, and the most vulnerable are especially impacted. In 2015, the UN member states made it their mission to achieve peace and prosperity by 2030. To measure governments' progress towards this mission, they established 17 Sustainable Development Goals that each country was tasked to meet. But COVID-19 has presented a unique challenge in accomplishing several key SDGs. The goal most directly affected by COVID-19 is SDG 3, Good Health and Well-Being. Across the world, people are getting sick and dying from COVID-19. Because healthcare systems have been overwhelmed by the virus, they are unable to care for those with other illnesses as well. The pandemic has deprived children of their regular education, which impacts SDG 4, quality education, and its end goal of helping people escape poverty. It is estimated that 90% of students worldwide are already out of school, and this has exacerbated the inequality between the richest and poorest students. In low-income countries, children of the richest 20% have a 79% education completion rate, while children of the poorest 20% have a 34% completion rate. It is also estimated that education online is out of reach for at least 500 million students worldwide. The UN created SDG 5, gender equality, to ensure it is treated as a human right and a necessary foundation for a better world. However, women are facing more consequences of the pandemic than men. The front lines of the pandemic are overwhelmingly female. Worldwide, 70% of all health and social workers are women, putting women directly in harm's way of the virus itself. Because of stay-at-home orders, women across the world are also being harmed more often by abusive partners. The virus has already done significant damage and will continue to do more if governments do not act swiftly to protect the most vulnerable. The UN acknowledges that the first priority must be for governments and healthcare systems to control the disease and mitigate as many of the impacts to the SDGs as possible. Governments must create a map to recovery from COVID-19 that ensures no one will be left behind.
Okay, a lot of those are credits after that. And I want to quickly go on to sort of talk about each of the goals. And you'll notice that the presentation includes sort of before COVID-19 and after. These measurements that I'm going to share with you focus, they were done in June, I think, of last year. So they're not quite a year old. And we'll get an update this year. They report every June. So you will see a sort of somewhat dated, but still COVID sensitive, muting my wife, presentation of the goals. So here we go. And are we back to the presentation? Give me a thumbs up. Great. Thank you. So you already saw it, but let's look at a few of the measurements. Goal 1 is reducing poverty, and that means extreme poverty. That's people living on less than $1.25 a day. And the goal was to reduce by half by 2030 the number of people living below $1.25 a day. And we were on track to achieve it. Back in 2010, 15.7% were in extreme poverty. We were headed in 2019 at 8.2. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has put a lot of people back into poverty. And so this impacts a lot of young people. Some of you know these people. And a lot of countries don't have a set of protections. Germany has kept their payroll going. Some countries like ours have sent in individual checks based on income and other schemes, but 4 billion people didn't have any last year. Goal 2 is less hunger. We'd like to eliminate hunger altogether, but and many of you named this as one of the things you would want in a better world. So that means teaching people how to fish and farm, not just give them handouts. How are we doing? Unfortunately, there's still quite a bit of hunger in the world, people that are food insecure, and the food distribution chain has been further impacted by COVID as well. Goal 3 is good health and well-being. This is the one that really took a hit with COVID, but how were we doing before? Child health is getting better. Maternal health was getting better. HIV was getting better. And the United States, under both political parties, has been quite helpful with addressing HIV/AIDS. The George W. Bush administration was a leader on this. Other administrations have also helped. The United Nations and its agencies is responsible for over half the child immunizations in the world. So a lot of countries simply don't have a health system that can immunize their children. And then COVID-19 has disrupted many of these efforts. Quality education. Many of you know Malala, the Afghani education advocate, who of course survived trauma and is a very powerful spokesperson. They've measured elementary education as the most important entry to quality education. If you give boys and girls quality elementary education, you will get a better outcome for your culture. And of course, COVID just took people out at the knees here and around the world. So you can see the differential between rich countries and poor countries. There's that linkage again between goals of education and inequality and developed and less developed countries. And they talked about in the video, remote learning is not available to hundreds of millions of students. Goal 5 is gender equality. If you take a good look at the Millennium Goals and the global goals, you'll see that they're suffused with women and girls. One of the biggest problems we have in the world is that we treat women and girls as second-class citizens. We don't give them full and equal rights. We don't educate them as much. We pay them less. They don't get to be leaders in our businesses and our legal institutions as much. And the sooner we solve that, the sooner it's going to get better for everyone. Here's some of the data. We still have girls being forced into early marriage. We do have some progress in leadership. So we're up to 25% of national parliaments are women, 36% in local governments. And of course, they talked about in the video, 70% of the frontline health workers are women. So COVID has hit us very hard. And in isolation, more abuse occurs as well. And not to be overlooked, a lot of women have had to drop out of the workforce because they are stuck with all or the majority of childcare. So gender equality is definitely been set back. Melinda Gates, who's a strong advocate for the goals, has stated that COVID has put the sustainable goals back 25 years. So we're back to where we were data-wise in 1995 with COVID. Just this terrible setback. Clean water. Here's a place where we were actually making progress. And you can still see that we have some ways to go. We've got 7.5 billion people in the world. Some of the water is not safely managed, and we don't safely manage sanitation for over half the population. And so this is a problem with disease. We're seeing it in India right now. This is just an incredible number up here. Oh, broke my promise, I moused. 2 in 5 healthcare facilities don't have soap and water. Amazing. Water scarcity. Fresh water is hard to come by in many parts of the world, and it will be pushing more immigration and refugees by 2030. Goal 7, affordable and clean energy. We've made some progress here. And it helps when we have political leaders here or elsewhere that know that this is a real issue. The Defense Department of the United States has said that global climate change is the #1 security issue being faced in the next 30 years. So we've done better with getting electricity to people, but still about 1 in 10 people around the world lack electricity. And having reliable energy, the state of Texas had a problem last year that was deadly to some of their citizens. So we all need to be doing more with smart grids and electrical accessibility. Energy efficiency. This little battery logo on the display tells us we really need to step up our energy efficiency of all of our electrical usages. And we're making some progress, but we need to do even more. Work and economic growth. We were slowing down. The GDP was slowing down around the world. We were having a pretty good economy before COVID-19, at least for most Americans, but COVID has put the kibosh on a lot of that. You can see that we've got a lot of work to do coming out of this. We've had, under both political parties, relief for Americans for COVID-19, and that kind of assistance has to be granted not just in wealthy countries to their own citizens, but the poor countries as well. Goal 9, infrastructure and innovation. We all know that our roads and bridges are failing, but even the infrastructure for electricity and water and for high-speed broadband connections to the internet, all of these are going to take massive investments, and it's not just here at home, it's around the world. So we had manufacturing declining before COVID, and of course many industries have just been completely killed by COVID. The cruise industry, aviation, travel, tourism, all that kind of stuff. And until we get COVID under control, this is a big unknown. Just ask anyone making travel plans for 6 months or a year from now. We don't know what it's going to be. Reduced inequalities. This is perhaps, I think, the most overarching and important goal of the 17. Inequalities is just associated with so many bad things. If you measure inequality across countries, the rate of suicide, depression, teen birth, lack of health care, and of course poverty, goes with inequality. So when you have some people who are obscenely rich, have more money than they know what to do with, and you have others that don't know where they're going to get their next meal, it's a shameful condition. And whether you're religious or not, we know that's a bad thing. And if we're going to be good Samaritans, we need to take some action and do something about that. We had across the world falling inequality until 2017, but it looks like inequality both here and around the world is making it worse with COVID. The stock market is up partly by public policy. The Federal Reserve Board buys corporate assets to keep our economy strong, which boosts the price of stock. And so some of that's a public policy. Other public policies, the most recent legislation targets low and middle income. Global recession, we're not sure how COVID's gonna treat us. So this is year-old stuff, but it's still happening. Goal 11, sustainable cities. Most of us live in cities, and if we don't make our cities sustainable, it's going to be hard to achieve that goal worldwide. We've had a reduction in slums, that's good, but there has been some up and down on that. And COVID-19 spreads faster in urban areas. Air pollution causes a lot of premature deaths. Responsible consumption and production. I'm struck every time I go to a takeout place or a restaurant or a grocery store, how much plastic I get. It would be so much better if we, even the best plastics, the ones you can recycle, the ones and the twos on the bottom of the piece of plastic, only about 20% of plastic ever is recycled. So if we buy or use plastic, we have to accept the fact that 80% of it is going to end up in the environment. Here's the worldwide picture. Our material footprint, unfortunately, continues to rise. So this is how much stuff we use. The more people, the more stuff. And having more and bigger and faster and newer is going to hurt the planet badly. Electronic waste is the same thing as plastics. You see in the upper right-hand corner, only 20% of those electronic devices get recycled. And China has told us, we don't want your electronic junk anymore. They're not letting us ship our stuff to them anymore. And here's my Greta Thunberg slide. Although she's very critical of the UN in general, because she doesn't think they're doing enough or fast enough, this is the goal that the UN has set for urgent action. And we have an asterisk there. That's because the Paris Accord and its associated agreements is the major climate change addressing, but we're also doing these goals to measure. And so the temperatures keeps rising, CO2 keeps rising. At this rate, we're at the current rate, we're going to have 3.2 degrees centigrade in the next 80 years, which is, we can't live without, we will have a full-scale climate disaster unless we really address this issue. We may get a temporary respite. We got 6% drop of greenhouse gases during COVID, but we had already set ourselves a target of 7.6% reduction to stay on track. And unfortunately, that lower right-hand corner talks about we're still investing more in fossil fuels than we are on climate mitigation and renewables. Below water, the ocean covers 3/4 of the earth. And if we don't take care of the ocean, we're in big trouble. And the ocean is warming up. The ocean is getting more acid. And so we've got a lot of work to do. They think that with COVID-19, we may get a slight respite and we may have a chance to make things better. We have increased the biodiversity areas. So we're protecting some areas so that fish and other wildlife can grow and replicate and be safe in some areas so that they don't get totally wiped out. Life on land, of course, we live on the land, and if we don't take care of the land, the soil, the water, the trees, the wildlife, our own lives, we're in trouble. So we've lost a lot of biodiversity. We are hoping that we can slow down this terrible depletion of species. So 27% of assessed species are in danger. Wildlife trafficking is out there. And we keep degrading the land, and our forested areas are continuing to go down. So we have to plant back, use less, and keep the planet whole for future generations. This is the rule of law. We have to have justice for everyone. There are places where people get abused, including the United States. We've just seen this with Black Lives Matter. We need to keep working on this, and the world needs to keep working on this. Here's some of the data. We are having a slight decrease in homicide worldwide. Of course, the United States has way too many people in prison. We in the United States have about 4.2% of the world's population, and we have almost 25% of the world's prisoners. So they are a problem compounded by COVID-19. Here's the connection between some of the goals and Black Lives Matter. And the last goal, implementation. And this includes measuring, coming to agreements, taking action, trying to help outliers who either lack means or lack the will to address the problems that affect us all. And so this tells us that the rich countries are going to have to help some of the poor countries. Aid is still continuing to flow. We don't give as much as we think we give, but it's important that we, like with COVID, that the world is not going to get better until we take care of all. So this is the last slide. If you want to be part of learning more about this, these are some of the links for joining UNA USA. There are 20 chapters of UNA in California. I'm involved in the local Southern California division and the Pomona Valley chapter. We have monthly meetings, and we have a Facebook page, so we hope you'll check out our website and our Facebook page. I give to some of these organizations. My wife, Beth, and I contribute to the International Rescue Committee, the UN Refugee Organization, the World Food Program, the World Health Organization, and I'm active in UNA advocacy. Advocacy means asking our federal representatives to fully fund and support the constructive activities of the UN and help with reform when the UN falls short, as it does. It's got 195 countries with different agendas, and things can go wrong. So when things do go wrong, we want to be part of correcting those wrong behaviors. So I'm going to stop the share and invite your questions. Just raise your hand and call out your question. Are you waving, Chris, or do you have a question? We can't have a Zoom without unmute yourself. These are part of my family, Charles and Priscilla Porter in Palm Desert.
And I was just waving.
Okay, just waving. That's great. Any comments about what you've just heard? I'm sorry we had all those numbers, but behind those numbers, just like with COVID, they're real people.
Mel,
Yes.
thank you for the update. I really appreciate that. I don't have a question, but I appreciate learning what's new. Lots changed.
Yeah, the world is changing fast. I hope we can get it right. I have a 2-year-old grandson who needs a big, beautiful world like I enjoyed. Donna, you always have a comment or a question. Come on.
You know, I'm so with you on the grandkid. I just had dinner with my daughter and the 12-year-old 2 nights ago. And how do you not end up with young people being so depressed by our conditions that they don't end up in some anxiety, depression mode because the problems, the global issues are so large, right? I love your work, Mel, and you're so right on. And the United Nations is, thank goodness, and a global view of our needs. But we had this conversation over dinner. How do you make sure the next generation is absolutely motivated and committed? At some level, they just turn and say, look, we'll fix it because you guys screwed it up, right? And on the other hand, how do you not end up with them being so depressed and overwhelmed?
Well, that is a real issue. I'm proud to say that the United Nations Association, half of our membership, so about 10,000 plus of our 20,000 members are young people under 25. So many of them want to engage. they want to get active. They want to change that world, maybe to unscramble it after we've screwed it up, but they want to be a part of it. There are some who are going to be depressed, and I think we need to help them as well. I think engaging these young people is the best way forward. Carol Lee, you had your hand up.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about your own personal experience. Have you been to New York to attend meetings, or is all of your work done here in our area?
Well, yes. I've been involved for a little over 15 years. I think I joined in 2004. And I've been in national leadership and regional leadership.
Oh, good.
And I've gone to New York and DC. We go to lobby every June, and we go to New York every February to sit in that beautiful hall and hear from experts of how it's going or not going. And it's been a wonderful journey of learning. I just combine my love of other countries and wanting to know more and appreciate history with engaging on this. It costs $25 a year to join the UNA, unless you're a young person, and then we let you join for free. We don't want money to get in the way of young people joining our organization. And we get a terrific number of young leaders that get involved. And it's been very exciting. I'm 76 here in a couple of months. So I'm not as young as I used to be, but we also bring some knowledge from our years of experience and what might work or not work, or why people think the way we thought during the 70s and 80s, and some people still think that way, and why others are trying to find the better way. Thank you for asking.
I grew up in New York, and I grew up with the UN. I was a teenager when it was formed, and my mother was involved with Eleanor Roosevelt getting the health part set up. And so we were very much a part of it. A lot of them lived in the town I lived in. A lot of the people who worked at the UN. So it was a pretty exciting time. I remember it well.
Wow.
I was very fortunate to be there when it all was going on.
Yeah, Eleanor Roosevelt was our national spokesperson after she stepped down from the UN.
Mm-hmm.
So she was very involved in our organization until her death in the 60s.
Our neighbor actually went down with Doug Hammarskjöld when he was shot down, and his number 2 guy was a neighbor of ours. That was very sad.
Yeah, I have a fellow board member here in Pomona Valley who is a good Rotarian, former district governor of Rotary. Her name is Sylvia Whitlock, and she's just a wonderful person and still full of a lot of giving. She worked at the UN in the 1960s in the accounting department. She paid the staff, but she still brings that passion. She was there when Doug Hammarskjöld was killed in the plane crash. Any final comments? We want to get you guys into the sanctuary for church. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so
Been a
much for your
pleasure.
work, Mel.
Yes, thank you,
betcha.
Mel.
Thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you.
Take care.
Now,
Take
I'm
care.
proud of my
Sunday.
son-in-law.
Well, thanks, Chuck.
Take care, everybody. Stay well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.